It was exactly 7:32 on the crisp, clear morning of January 11th, 1945, when Captain William Shomo climbed into the sleek cockpit of his F-60 Mustang at Morro Airstrip in the war-torn Philippines. He adjusted his flight harness carefully and watched the dedicated ground crew top off his fuel tanks. Each man knowing a small oversight could mean the difference between a safe return and never coming home. On paper, this was just another routine photo reconnaissance mission over the rugged terrain of northern Luzon, a task deeply familiar to Shomo after 2 long years of combat service. To onlookers on the ground, it was the same unglamorous, low-key assignment he'd flown hundreds of times before. Fly north, snap clear photos of Japanese airfields, avoid trouble if at all possible, and return safely. At 26 years old, Shomo was already a seasoned combat veteran with 203 completed combat missions and just one solitary aerial victory to his name, a modest tally that paled in comparison to the aces he deeply admired. The Japanese military still fielded roughly 300 fighter planes hidden away in remote Luzon airfields, all poised to strike at American forces at a moment's notice. But Shomo wasn't part of the glamorous fighter squadrons that earned fame. For 16 long, frustrating months, he'd been stationed in the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, flying critical but uncelebrated missions far from the glory of aerial combat. Those 16 long months, he'd moved from crew jungle airstrips in New Guinea to the island of Morotai, slowly drawing closer to the Philippines but never any closer to the real fight he so deeply craved. His job was vital to the war effort: photograph enemy positions with precision, strafe ground targets to disrupt Japanese supply lines, and gather critical intelligence for Allied forces. But his planes, the slow, underpowered P-39 era Cobra and limited-range P-40 Warhawk, lacked the necessary range to reach the inland areas where Japanese fighters operated freely. He flew endless circles over empty beaches and bombed out sites while other pilots soared into combat and became legends. Pilots of P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt squadrons got the thrilling dogfights, loud cheers from the ground crew, and the coveted ace title earned by shooting down 5 or more enemy planes, heroes admired by every soldier and fellow pilot alike. Shomo, by contrast, got blurry, grainy photos of empty runways, the constant hum of his engine as he flew alone over hostile enemy territory, and the quiet, gnawing frustration of knowing he was more than capable of achieving greater things. Before the war broke out, Shomo worked as a respected undertaker in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a profession that instilled in him a quiet calm under pressure, meticulous attention to detail, and a deep, unspoken respect for both life and death. He had studied diligently at the Cincinnati College of Embalming and the Pittsburgh School of Embalming, mastering every aspect of his craft to prepare bodies for their final rest with dignity. Now halfway around the world in the thick of a brutal war, he found himself stuck taking reconnaissance photos while other pilots soared into battle and became aces. A cruel and bitter irony. A man who was trained to lay others to rest was now waiting patiently for a chance to fight bravely for his own survival and that of his fellow soldiers. In December 1944, everything changed for Shomo and his squadron. They finally received the long-awaited F-60 Mustang, the armed photo recon version of the legendary P-51 Mustang, a plane equipped with long-range, blistering speed, and 6 powerful .50 caliber machine guns. For the first time in his entire military career, Shomo might actually get to experience the aerial combat he dreamed of since enlisting, a small glimmer of hope in what had often felt like an endless war. On Christmas Eve, Shomo took command of the squadron, relocating his men to Morro Airstrip to support MacArthur's upcoming Lingayen Gulf landing. On January 9, 1945, he flew his first Mustang combat mission, a low-level sweep over northern Luzon. Near Tuguegarao Airfield, he spotted an enemy Val dive bomber glinting in the sun. The slow, unassuming Val lined up carefully to land on the Japanese airfield, completely unaware of the deadly danger closing in from behind. Shomo's heart raced with excitement and anticipation. He closed in silently, his Mustang's engine purring softly, then squeezed the trigger, and his 6 machine guns roared to life. The Val erupted in a bright ball of flames, crashing short of the runway. a fiery wreck plummeting to the ground below. It was his first real, meaningful victory, one that felt earned, even if the enemy had been unguarded. After 202 grueling combat missions, 16 long months of frustrating waiting, and countless hours flying outdated, underpowered planes, he'd finally shot down an enemy aircraft in combat, even if it was a slow, unprotected bomber. But it was a start, a small taste of the glory he'd dreamed of for so long. That night, Shomo lay awake in his tent, replaying the moment over and over in his mind, wondering if he'd ever get another chance to prove himself in a true, intense dogfight against enemy fighters who could fight back. 24 hours later, as the first light of dawn faded into a bright morning, Shomo was back in the cockpit of his Mustang, same photo recon mission, same route over northern Luzon, this time with his wingman, Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, a young, eager pilot who joined the squadron in late 1944 and was hungry to prove his mettle in real combat. The two F-60 Mustangs flew north in tight formation, hugging the wave-top height just above the sparkling blue waters of the Luzon Strait, staying well below Japanese radar and out of sight of enemy lookouts. Standard procedure for photo recon missions that demanded stealth above all else. It was boring, repetitive work that Shomo knew by heart, having flown the same route and performed the same tasks dozens of times in the weeks prior. He'd grown accustomed to the monotony, the steady hum of the Mustang's engine, the endless stretch of green jungle below, and the constant vigilance required to avoid enemy radar and ground fire. But as they crossed Luzon's northern coast and headed inland, the clear, cloudless sky and unlimited visibility felt different, almost eerie in its perfection. It was ideal for capturing crisp, detailed reconnaissance photos, but it also meant that any enemy planes in the area would have just as clear a view of them. At exactly 900 hours, as Shomo leaned forward to adjust his camera settings, squinting slightly against the bright morning sun, something glinting in the sky above caught his eye. A flash of metal that broke the perfect blue expanse. He looked up. 2,000 feet above, a large formation of Japanese aircraft flew straight toward them. Shomo's breath caught. He counted, unable to believe his eyes. 12 Kawasaki Ki-61. Tonys, sleek, fast, deadly, plus one Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo, a fearsome interceptor. 13 fighters total. In the middle, a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty twin-engine bomber used to transport high-ranking officers and critical supplies. 13 enemy planes, 2 American Mustangs. Any logical pilot would hide, let the formation pass, finish the mission, and return safely. No one would blame him. But Shomo had waited 16 months for real combat, flying 203 missions for one unchallenged kill. This was his chance to prove he was more than a photographer in a fighter plane. His voice steady over the radio, he said to Lipscomb, "Lipscomb, we're attacking." He hauled back on the control stick, sending his Mustang climbing toward the sky, in a fight that would change his life. Shomo pulled his Mustang into a sharp, steep climbing turn and executed a flawless Immelmann maneuver, flipping the plane up and over in a smooth arc, reversing its direction while gaining altitude rapidly, a tactical move he'd practiced hundreds of times in training drills but never once had to use in the heat of real combat. Lieutenant Lipscomb, ever the loyal and skilled wingman, stuck tight to his leader's side, mirroring every one of Shomo's moves with precise timing. His eyes locked on Shomo's Mustang as the two planes soared upward, their engines screaming at full power, closing the 2,000-foot gap between them and the unsuspecting Japanese formation with every passing second. Below, the Japanese formation flew steadily southward, completely unalarmed and unaware of the danger lurking just below them. American reconnaissance planes were rarely a threat. They typically fled at the first sight of enemy fighters, focused solely on completing their photo mission and returning to base. To make matters worse, the F-60 Mustang was still new to the Pacific Theater, having only been deployed to Shomo's squadron a few weeks earlier. Most Japanese pilots had never seen one before, and its sleek design bore a vague resemblance to some Japanese fighter variants from a distance. This combination of overconfidence and unfamiliarity led them to mistake the two Mustangs for friendly reinforcements arriving to join their formation, and not a single pilot bothered to glance downward, a fatal error that would cost them dearly. After completing the Immelmann turn, Shomo found himself positioned less than 40 yards behind the rear element of the Japanese formation, point-blank range for his 6.50 caliber machine guns. He could see every tiny detail clearly. The Japanese pilots' faces, some focused and stoic, others chatting casually or adjusting their headsets. The distinct red roundels painted on the wings of their planes. Even one pilot who had lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up toward his canopy. It was a surreal, almost dreamlike moment. Here he was, just feet away from the enemy pilots he'd waited years to face, and they had no idea he was there. No inkling that death was about to strike. Incredibly, the Japanese waved, assuming they were allies. Some opened canopies to shout greetings. One stood and waved enthusiastically, relieved. It was unguarded trust Shomo had to exploit. Then Shomo opened fire. His 6.50 caliber machine guns roared to life, tearing through the lead rear Tony's fuselage and instantly igniting its fuel tank. The enemy plane disintegrated in a ball of flame, its wings and tail tumbling chaotically through the formation. The Japanese pilot never had a chance to react. He was gone in the blink of an eye. Shomo didn't pause. He shifted aim to the Tony's wingman, squeezed the trigger, and another explosion followed. The second Tony caught fire, its engine failing. The pilot tried to bail out, but his plane spun into the jungle, trailing smoke and flame. 2 kills in 3 seconds. Unprecedented. But Shomo was just getting started. The once disciplined Japanese formation shattered in an instant, like glass breaking under a heavy blow. Panic spread like wildfire through the ranks of the Japanese pilots, as each man finally realized their deadly mistake. These were not friendly reinforcements, but enemy American Mustangs. Some pilots jerked their planes into sharp turns to fight back, their aircraft banking and rolling as they tried to get into position to fire their guns. Others dove frantically for the safety of the ground, hugging the treetops in a desperate bid to escape the carnage above. A few froze in terror, their planes flying straight and level, as if their pilots couldn't process the chaos unfolding around them. The tight, organized escort formation dissolved into a chaotic, disorganized mess of planes, each pilot fighting only for their own life, with no coordination, no plan, and no hope of turning the tide of the battle. Shomo didn't hesitate. He knew chaos favored calm attackers who picked targets methodically. He sliced into the second group, closing in on a stray Tony, fired a precise burst, and it exploded midair. 3 kills in 10 seconds. Shomo's hands were steady, mind-focused. Instinctive moves, precise shots, perfect decisions. The remaining 10 Japanese fighters tried to counterattack, outnumbering the Americans nearly 7-1. But Shomo gave them no time. He circled to the opposite side, spotted a Tony joining the counterattack, and fired, blowing it apart. The pilot ejected too late, his parachute failing. 4th kill. The sky was now filled with thick black smoke and swirling debris. The air acrid with the smell of burning fuel and metal, but Shomo's focus never wavered for a single second. Scanning the chaos below, he spotted the Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber diving rapidly toward the ground, its pilot desperate to escape by hugging the terrain, where the thick jungle might offer some cover from enemy fire. 2 Kawasaki Ki 61 Tonys clung tightly to its sides, their pilots remaining loyal to their charge even as their entire formation crumbled around them, determined to protect the bomber at all costs. Shomo wasted no time. He flipped his Mustang inverted, pulling a sharp split-S maneuver that sent his plane plunging downward at full speed, a move designed to quickly lose altitude and get behind the fleeing enemy aircraft, where they would be most vulnerable. Within seconds, he was positioned directly beneath the Betty, the one spot where the bomber had no defensive guns. Its turrets were mounted on the nose, tail, and top, leaving its belly completely exposed and defenseless. He pulled up, aligned his guns, and fired a sustained burst. The Betty caught fire, flames spreading to fuel tanks and engines. The pilot fought to land, but it was doomed. 5th kill. As Shomo climbed in a tight spiral, a jolt hit his plane. Someone was shooting. A Tojo was on his tail, firing tracer rounds like red lightning. The Tojo was fast, deadly, with better climb rate and firepower, the most dangerous opponent yet. Shomo stayed calm and collected, drawing on his years of training and experience. He knew the Mustang's key strengths and the Tojo's notable weaknesses. The Mustang could outturn the Tojo at low speeds, especially in tight, vertical spirals. He held the spiral tight, pulling back on the control stick with all his strength, the plane shaking violently under the intense G-force, his vision blurring at the edges. The Japanese pilot struggled to follow, firing continuously, but the tight turn bled off his airspeed rapidly. His plane slowed down, its nose dropping sharply until it stalled and slipped away into a thick layer of clouds below. Fleeing the fight, too damaged and too slow to continue the engagement. Below, the Betty bomber slammed into the lush Luzon jungle with a deafening explosion, sending a massive fireball and thick black smoke soaring into the sky. The powerful blast wave rocked Shomo's Mustang, jolting him slightly in his seat, and small debris from the bomber pelted his wings. Minor dents that were a small price to pay for the hard-fought victory he just achieved. The two remaining Tony escorts, seeing their precious bomber destroyed, immediately broke formation and fled low over the treetops, desperate to escape with their lives. Shomo gave chase, diving steeply. The first fleeing Tony flew erratically. He caught up, fired, and it crashed into the jungle, erupting in flame. Sixth kill. He dropped 100 feet, skimming treetops, chasing the second Tony. The pilot flew at full speed, but Shomo was faster. He led the target, fired, and bullets tore through the engine. The Tony caught fire, wings folding as it crashed into a hillside. Seventh kill. 7 Japanese planes destroyed in roughly 6 minutes, unheard of in the Pacific War, likely never to be repeated. Lipscomb had fought valiantly too, shooting down 3 Tonys, impressive for a young pilot in his first real combat. 3 more smoke columns marked his kills. Total, 10 Japanese planes destroyed. 3 fled into the clouds, but the rest lay in wreckage across Luzon's hills and jungles. 2 Mustangs, 13 enemies, 10 kills. No losses. A miracle. A lopsided victory no one would believe without seeing it. Shomo turned his Mustang southward, heading back toward Muro airstrip, his heart still racing with the adrenaline of the intense combat, and his hands slightly shaking from the physical and mental strain of the fight. Lipscomb quickly fell into formation beside him, his own plane unscathed, and both pilots flew in silence for a moment, fully aware that they'd just been part of something historic, something that would be talked about for years to come. The 40-minute flight back gave Shomo time to process the unthinkable. 7 enemy kills in a single mission, making him not just an ace, but a double ace in the blink of an eye. Most pilots spent months, even years, risking their lives in countless dogfights to accumulate 5 kills. Shomo had done it in just 6 minutes of relentless, precise combat. He thought of Muro's tradition, 1 victory roll per kill. He'd do 7, something no one had ever seen. The brass would be skeptical, but the gun camera footage and Lipscomb's account would prove it. He had 40 minutes to figure out how to explain the impossible. At 10:47 that morning, Shomo crossed the coastline at Lingayen Gulf, the sparkling blue waters of the Gulf stretching out below him in a vast expanse. A stark and peaceful contrast to the chaotic, fiery combat he'd just left behind over northern Luzon. Muro airstrip was still 20 minutes ahead, its 2 dirt runways visible in the distance, along with rows of parked aircraft, simple support buildings, and the familiar operations tent of the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron. He'd used the entire 40-minute flight back to replay the entire combat sequence in his mind, rehashing every maneuver, every shot fired, every enemy plane destroyed, memorizing every tiny detail, knowing full well that no one would believe his story unless he could recount it with perfect accuracy, down to the smallest moment. He thought of each kill, the first Tony's disintegration, the Betty's unprotected belly, the Tojo on his tail, Lipscomb's 3 kills. Every moment was clear, a story too incredible but true. Near Muro, he saw ground crew gathering, intelligence officers waiting, command staff skeptical. No one would believe one pilot shot down 7 planes in a mission. Shomo keyed his radio. Tower, Captain Shomo, 82nd Recon, 2 F-6D Mustangs inbound, no damage, no casualties. 10 enemy aircraft destroyed. A long pause, the tower replied, Captain Shomo, repeat. Did you say 10 enemy aircraft destroyed? Affirmative, Shomo said firmly. 10 total. 7 by me, 3 by Lieutenant Lipscomb. Another pause then. Roger, Captain. Clear to land, runway 27. Welcome home. But Shomo wasn't landing yet. He had 7 victory rolls to perform, 1 for each enemy plane he'd destroyed. And he was determined to honor the tradition, to celebrate every single moment of the victory he'd waited so long to achieve. He flew low over the airfield, his Mustang skimming just above the rooftops of the support buildings and the heads of the gathered crowd, then pulled back gently on the control stick, sending the plane into a smooth, graceful victory roll. One complete rotation that drew cheers and waves from the ground crew below. He leveled out briefly, then did a second roll, just as precise and flawless as the first. By the third roll, the crowd had grown exponentially, more and more personnel pouring out of tents and buildings, their jaws dropping in disbelief as they watched the Mustang roll again and again. By the fourth roll, the entire airfield had ground to a halt. Everyone was watching, from the lowliest privates to the highest-ranking officers, all realizing that something extraordinary had happened. By the sixth roll, colonels and generals had emerged from their offices, their faces filled with shock and awe, because no pilot in the history of the base had ever done 6 victory rolls. 6 rolls meant 6 kills, and 6 kills in one mission was unthinkable, impossible. After the 7th roll, Shomo entered the landing pattern. Lipscomb did 3 rolls of his own, impressive but overshadowed by Shomo's feat. Shomo touched down on runway 27 at 11:09 local time, 2 hours and 37 minutes after he'd taken off that morning, with just 6 of those minutes being the ones that would turn his life upside down and write his name into military history. 6 minutes of intense, relentless combat had transformed him from a humble, overlooked reconnaissance pilot into a living legend. He taxied his Mustang slowly to the squadron's designated area, shut down the engine with a final sputter, and opened the canopy, letting the warm, humid Philippine air rush into the cockpit and wash over him. His flight suit was soaked through with sweat, his hands still shaking slightly from the lingering adrenaline of the fight, his body tired to the bone, but his spirit soaring with a sense of triumph he'd waited years to feel. Ground Crew Chief Sergeant Miller climbed onto the wing, excited and disbelieving. "Captain, did you really get 7 kills? Tell me everything." Shomo smiled, patting his shoulder. "Sergeant, it's true. 10 total. You'll see the gun camera film." Intelligence Officer Major Thomas pulled him aside. "We need to debrief you now, every detail. The brass won't believe it without documentation." Shomo spent 3 hours debriefing, leaving nothing out. The formation, the decision to attack, the Immelman turn, the 7 kills, Lipscomb's role. He knew the story had to be accurate. 7 kills sounded impossible, even to him. By 1400 hours that afternoon, the gun camera film was fully developed. The entire command staff gathered to watch it, skeptical at first until the footage clearly showed 7 precise, deadly kills in just 6 minutes. Undeniable proof of Shomo's exceptional skill and Lipscomb's unwavering courage. Lipscomb's own debriefing later confirmed every single detail of the extraordinary mission. By 1600 hours, it was official. Shomo had destroyed 7 enemy planes in one mission, only the second American pilot ever to do so. Navy Commander David McCampbell had shot down 9 in 1944, but he'd spent years accumulating victories. Shomo had one previous kill before that day. Word of Shomo's extraordinary feat spread like wildfire across the base, and soon across the entire 5th Air Force. Within hours, pilots from other squadrons, fighter pilots who had spent months chasing the ace title, were flocking to Muro Airstrip, eager to meet the humble reconnaissance pilot who had achieved in 6 minutes what most of them could only dream of achieving in a lifetime. They crowded around him, asking endless questions about his tactics, his shooting technique, and his split-second decision to attack 13 enemy planes with just 2 Mustangs. Through it all, Shomo remained humble and grounded, never boasting about his achievement, always quick to credit Lieutenant Lipscomb for his unwavering support, the F-60 Mustang for its exceptional performance, and pure timing for putting him in the right place at the right time. He never forgot the frustration of waiting 16 months for a chance to fight, and he never let the sudden fame go to his head. Shomo's journey began in August 1941, when he enlisted to fly fighters. He trained hard but was assigned to recon, flying P-39s and P-49s too short range to reach enemy fighters. He watched aces like Richard Bong become famous while he flew alone, photographing beaches. The F-60 Mustang changed everything for Shomo. Its long-range, blistering speed and devastating firepower finally gave him a real chance to fight back against the enemy. As squadron commander, he moved his men to Morro Airstrip in early January 1945, positioning them perfectly to support MacArthur's upcoming Lingayen Gulf landing. His January 9th Mustang mission was his first taste of real aerial combat in the new plane, but it was little more than target practice, a slow landing Val bomber. January 11th was different. Real, intense combat against skilled Japanese pilots and overwhelming odds, and Shomo prevailed spectacularly. The Japanese formation was no random patrol. 13 fighters escorting a Betty meant protecting something valuable, high-ranking officers or critical supplies. The Tonys and Tojo were dangerous, but no match for the Mustang or Shomo's skill. Shomo's extraordinary victory that day was not the result of luck or chance. It was the product of 3 long years of rigorous training, countless hours of studying aerial tactics, and unwavering dedication to his craft. He skillfully used the Mustang's key strengths, its speed, maneuverability, and devastating firepower, to his full advantage, while exploiting the Japanese pilots' critical mistakes. Their failure to scan the skies below, their mistaken assumption that the Mustangs were friendly, and their panicked disorganization when the attack began. Shomo stayed calm and focused under the most intense pressure, maintained complete control of his aircraft, and picked his targets methodically, making every shot count. A masterclass in aerial combat that would be studied by military pilots for decades. On April 1st, 1945, now Major Shomo received the Medal of Honor for extraordinary gallantry in attacking 13 enemy planes with 2 Mustangs, destroying 7 with no losses. Shomo flew more missions but never encountered large enemy formations again. His final stats: 203 missions before January 11th, 14 enemy planes sighted, 8 destroyed, a 57% kill ratio, the highest in the Pacific. His January 11th Mustang, affectionately named Snooks 5, after a long-standing tradition of naming his planes Snooks, was later lost, flown by another pilot on a separate mission. The aircraft destroyed, but the pilot narrowly surviving. His next Mustang was briefly named Snook 6, but he soon renamed it the Flying Undertaker, a fitting recognition of who he was, what he had accomplished, and the unique combination of his civilian profession and his military achievement. Shomo stayed in the military, transitioning smoothly to the United States Air Force when it was established in 1947, promoting to lieutenant colonel on February 20th, 1951, and retiring honorably in 1968 after 27 years of distinguished military service. In later interviews, Shomo credited luck and timing, never boasting. But other pilots saw his skill in the gun camera footage. Precise shooting, perfect tactics, unwavering focus. No luck, just mastery. Shomo passed away on June 25, 1990, at the age of 72, and was buried in St. Clair Cemetery in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, with his Medal of Honor proudly displayed, a lasting reminder of his courage, his exceptional skill, and his historic victory. His enduring legacy is simple but powerful. Preparation always matters. 3 years of patient waiting, rigorous training, and unwavering dedication made the difference between victory and defeat on that fateful January day. Lipscomb received the Distinguished Service Cross for his 3 kills and loyalty. The 3 fleeing Japanese pilots reported the impossible loss, weakening Japan's already fading air strength in the Philippines. Individual actions mattered. Shomo's 6 minutes brought the war closer to an end. Military historians later called his attack one of the Pacific War's most successful fighter engagements, a masterpiece of skill and courage. Shomo was a man who refused to give up on his dream, seizing his moment with skill and focus. The Flying Undertaker became his legacy, honoring his past, celebrating his achievement, ensuring he'd never be forgotten. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a small favor, hit that like button below. Every single like tells YouTube to show this incredible story to more people, ensuring that William Shomo's legendary feat doesn't fade away with time. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten WWII stories from dusty archives every single day. Drop a comment right now to tell us where you're watching from, or if someone in your family served in the war. Thank you for helping keep these heroes' memories alive.